My name is Gabby and I share a birthday with a murderer. Welcome to another episode of Critiquing the Outfits of Dead People. Today we're going to be talking about Lizzie Borden. For those of you who don't know the story, Lizzie and her sister lived with their father. For a long time they didn't have a lot of money. Eventually, their father came into a lot of money, but he was still as frugal and strict as he was when he had no money. Which is a very difficult place to be in when the only breadwinner in the house is kind of, stingy with the money. Ha! So, eventually, their father got married again, but it seemed as though he was spending a lot more money on the new wife. Buying a new house for her, spoiling her, etc. And this made Lizzie really upset because they had no money. And at the time, the 1800s, the late 1800s, it's not easy to sort of, as a woman, get around, do things, do anything. One day, the police called to come to the Borden house because 2 people had been murdered in the house. The police came and they searched around. And the story that they were told at the time was that Lizzie was in the shed the whole day. She told the maid that she was going to be in the shed the whole day, doing shed things. I don't think her sister was home the whole day. I think she was visiting family. So I don't think she was at home for a while. And the maid is the one who recounted everything, and the police, obviously they questioned Lizzie, and they were like, what's the tea, what happened, and there were a lot of discussions around her clothes, my favorite part. Eventually, sensationalism sort of caught up to the story after a fumbled police investigation, and from there, Lizzie was called to trial for the murders of these 2 people, but was acquitted. Acquitted, not charged, didn't go to prison, and got all of her father's money. Now, one of the things that the maid could recall was that the day after the police arrived, Lizzie had burnt a dress. But what also was stated was that this couldn't be a plausible theory that, Lizzie quickly changed, because apparently it was very, very difficult to get in and out of clothes back then. I'll get to that in a sec. So, this is the story of Lizzie Borden. She and her sister ended up living a very fruitful, very strange, crazy life afterwards, and so many theories surround this entire story, and people love the story. At the time the murders took place, 1896, fashion was softly changing. Now, it's very well-to-do, many pieces in a dress, many pieces on a suit, old-timey looking 1800s dresses, petticoats, corsets, frills, big hair, up hair. At the time, very formal looking constantly, and it was very, very interesting because it was mostly rich people that could get extravagant, interesting, and new pieces. Most people sort of lived with what they had. For example, Lizzie and her sister, they didn't have more than 2 dresses each because that was what their father bought for them. It was like, this is enough. So clothes is meant to last for a really long time for people, especially for people who didn't have much. And people who did have a lot, they could get their clothes, made directly in France, where everything was like, that was the spot. Everything new came out of France, and they could have it shipped over. But not long after, in the, the 1890s, the late 1800s, fashion at the time was changing. But there was still this air of whatever was happening in France, we wanted it. And wealthy people, they could get that done. They could get their clothes made in France and shipped over, or they could get their people to make it. But with electricity coming through, becoming more used, more normal, factories started using them. And that meant mass producing of clothes could happen. So clothing could now be made at home and could be easy to get, and more people could get their hands on good pieces. There were these very straight lines, very, very straight. I think with proportion more than anything, you'd see the massive hair, very tall, very neat, updo, and very, very big shoulders, very, very big shoulders, tight, snatched waist, because of the corset, large petticoat, large whalebone, I can't remember what it's called, large whalebone, I want to say rack, butt rack, dress rack, I can't remember. You know what I mean, so it's just layers and layers and layers of clothing. And even with suits, it wasn't just a two-piece, a coat, pants, a shirt, a tie, it was all these extra pieces, the waistcoat, the watch, the hat, the umbrella, the coat, so many extra pieces. And eventually, especially around this time, layers, more and more people shedding more and more of these layers. And really making room for sportswear, because with the bike and sports, I think people wanted it to be easier to move around, to get around, but also to put clothes on and take clothes off, to put clothes on and take clothes off. Now this is a really, really interesting piece of info, because remember when I talked about Lizzie, it was one of the theories surrounding Lizzie was that she had taken a dress. One of the theories surrounding Lizzie was that she had burned a dress the day after the police came. But this couldn't really be possible because it might have been really difficult to put on and take off. It's a chore. One person couldn't take off or put on one of those layers of clothing. But it's not impossible with sportswear. So now let's critique some of Lizzie's looks. Okay. So this one is a portrait, a picture, and she looks into the distance. She's got the pinned up hair, the curls, strong middle curls. That's like hair. That's like here. They've been brushing that for an hour to get it where it is. Oh, and strong neck, it's just covering everything. Long sleeves, lots of lace. I think black was really a thing. Lace, pleats on the chest. You can tell it's already forming the silhouette. Oh, one of the things that was really a thing in the late 1800s was that you could start to see more women wearing suits, which I think is really cool and really telling of history and clothing, because I don't believe clothing has, a fixed gender, but to the point where people could get this done not just at boutiques but also at tailors. So it's really neat, serious, professional portrait, and they did have some money, so it wasn't impossible to get this. And she does look like a well-to-do citizen. Oh, another portrait, white lace, frills, high up the neck, old shoulders. That's a murder scene. Good for you, Lizzie. Oh, this one. Ooh. Black suit-like. Very suit-like. You can see it. It's got like the tight waist, but it's got accents that look like a suit. And like really, really strong, like big puffy shoulders. Which I think is really dramatic. Eee. I want to see Lizzie in court. Oh, here we go. Here is Lizzie in court, right? She's got the hat, the fan, tight sleeves, you know, probably gloves, black, hanging lace, like her best dress. She's got the hat, she's like the gloves, she's like, hey family. You know, I mean, court is an event, so I suppose it's really, really good to like show up to court. And she was like, I'm here, I got it. And then there was this famous spread, front page, because Lizzie's story really became a sensationalized story. And she's got like her arms flinging up and the crowd is like, what? And it's Lizzie Borden not guilty. And this is probably the moment that she was, you know, that she was told. Doesn't seem like you committed the murders. Overall, you know, it seemed like Lizzie sort of like lived that life. And I think, you know, it'll be hard to forget one of the most sensationalized stories, especially at the time. So yeah, I think that's it. Thanks. Come again.